Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy. Hey, Bruce.
Hey David, how you doing today?
Fantastic, Bruce. How are you?
I'm all right. It's
I've
a
got
new
this new.
week to look forward a little bit.
Indeed, indeed. I've got this new. I buggered up my knee through overuse this winter, and I've kept injuring it. But I've got this new exercise thing called a slant board, and it's just a little board that's slanted, essentially slanted on the top, and you do stretching and strengthening exercises on it. And man, it has been fantastic. It's the one thing that's made a difference. So if you've got knee troubles, I highly recommend it's called the Zebra, I think, slant board. Very cheap little device I got on Amazon. So it's greatly improved my mood because I can play hockey this winter now because
Oh yeah.
I've rehabbed it enough. Maybe
Oh,
I
good.
should send one in the mail to Evander Kane.
Yeah, now that he's on the payroll, he might as well be playing games, right? Can't You can put
uh,
him on LTIR, but as soon as you do, you can't accrue any cap space, which apparently is one of the big objectives for the Oilers to accrue some space for another deadline ad like they did last year.
let's add Kane to the list of things we talk about because it has been on my mind. In today's podcast we're going to talk about what NHL draft insiders. I don't like ever calling them experts because I don't know if anyone's actually is there such a thing as expertise in ranking hockey players, uh, junior hockey players? That's an interesting question. So I like to call them insiders. Anyway, I do respect the work they do, and they provide comprehensive lists. They look at all these players. They're out there beating the bushes and watching all
Yeah.
this video.
Yeah,
So they have an opinion on the Oilers organization where they rank in the NHL. We'll get into that. We'll talk about some of the prospects we've um, ranked. We'll look back a little bit one more time at the Broberg Holloway situation and who is to blame because that issue keeps popping up. Um, what else are we talking about, Bruce? We'll talk about Darnell Nurse's the search for a new partner for Darnell Nurse now that Broberg is in St. Louis and Plan A is out the frickin' window.
And CC is in San Jose. Let's not forget his
Last we forget.
partner of the last 3 years for the most part.
Yeah, yeah. My spirit oiler, Cody CC.
Mm-hmm. The spirit
All right.
shark. No.
It's my spirit shark. I got to get a new spirit oiler. So that's the player who I relate to most as a hockey player because I kind of his game, at my level resembles Cody Cece's game at the NHL level. Kind of the slow moving defenseman who tries to get by, non-physical, who tries to get by reading the play and being in the right position. That's all I got, Bruce.
Being in the
So
way, hey, that's a big part of
getting
being
in
a
the
good
way.
defenseman, though.
Sure is. It sure is. So I got to. I have. There's not one who comes to mind. I have to say. Hopefully there will be. Maybe it'll be Ty Emberson. All right. Let's start off, Bruce. Let's just start off with Kane since it came up, and I'm
Sure.
going to. I'm going to ask you what you make of all this. So I'm going to outline kind of the timeline of weird things. So there's the Two Mutts podcast, which about probably 2 weeks ago now, 2.5 weeks ago, came out with a story that Kane, they didn't quote Kane, but they said, I think it was tweets actually, saying that Evander Kane is good to go. He's going to be at the captain's skate and ready for the season. Not going to need surgery. Not going to be on LTIR. That was 2 weeks ago, and so I contacted them and they told me they confirmed that they had spoken to Kane. So based on that and their track record, which has not been bad in terms of predicting what's going to happen, they had Stan Bowman likely signing as Oilers GM when people, that had kind of died down. I thought, and I looked at their website, their recent work. It seemed credible enough to report on it at least as especially their confirmation that they had talked to Kane himself. So A few days after that, though, Bob Stauffer and Ryan Rishaug both tweeted out that Kane is likely to get surgery and likely to be on LTIR to start the year. And then Elliot Friedman followed that up, reporting that Kane is likely to get surgery and could be out for some amount of time. Like he was talking maybe the whole year, likely January and February. And that gave that, based on these are like serious insiders, that information made me think, oh, the Oilers have a trump card in terms of retaining Broberg and Holloway. Kane goes on LTIR, gives them all kinds of time, maybe the whole year, to figure out if they match these two players, how to deal with it. And that's how it was looking to me. And I think many Oiler fans through that week, things start to unravel a bit, though, in that thinking when they trade for Podkolzin, and you think, oh, well, maybe they're going to move on from Holloway and keep Broberg. And then they trade CC, clearing up more cap space and a potential top four right shot D-man. And I'm thinking, yeah, they are going to match Broberg. So fast forward, they don't match Broberg or Holloway. And at the press conference, Stan Bowman is crystal clear, exceedingly clear. Well, this Kane on LTIR, that's completely between Kane and his doctor. That's not something that we have a say in. So, Bruce, what do you make of all that?
It's hard to make a lot of sense of it. I mean, I think there's some wishful thinking going on somewhere, whether it's Kane saying he's going to be ready to go, or whether it's insiders saying he's going to go on LTIR, when the true situation, or at least according to Stan Bowman, is that it's between the player and his doctor before the team even gets a say in it. From a very much outsider's point of view, it seems like Kane has at least not gone along with this idea of him being declared, injured and out long term. He's tried to play through it all of last year, and he's had a summer to recuperate. And if he does get surgery, maybe, maybe he misses a month and then comes back, they're still going to have that headache, right? So I think Bowman's solution was, let's make the cap space that we can carry his contract on the opening day roster. So we don't match, and we trade a guy making, something significant amount more than NHL minimum, which he basically had two choices in CC and Kulak, and chose CC. And all of a sudden, hey, Kane can start the season on the roster, and they could put him on LTIR on day 2, but that means they can't accrue cap right away. So they can just leave him on the payroll, put him on injured list, maybe if he's not ready to play the first 2 or 3 weeks, put him on injury list where they're still paying him, and maybe they're, accruing, a little gap between the payroll and the cap ceiling. But over the last year, it didn't seem like they were ever, that little gap never seemed to be more than a few $100,000. And yet at the trade deadline, they were able to, with some machinations, add a $6 million player in Adam Henrique.
So when we talk about accruing cap space, it's like every time you don't have a player on LTIR, you can, and you're below the cap, you're saving up that cap space.
A little bit of dollar here and there every day.
Okay, but the second you have a player on a LTIR, you stop accruing. If you have a player on LTIR at the start of the year and he comes off, though, you start accruing again. Is that correct? That's one thing. I'm sorry, Bruce, for asking that, because I know that we are neither of us are.
I'm not an insider on LTIR. I've read the section, and anyway, it doesn't always stick. Let's put it that way. But if you start to see if you're in LTIR all season, you can't accrue a dime, as we saw for 3 full years with the Clefbaum situation. And I have problems with that rule, frankly, because it's punitive to a team that, through no fault of their own, a central player loses his career to injury. Not only do you lose the player, but the league kicks you in the junk for LTIR status for the rest of his contract. That was a real double whammy. But it, when you're out of Elter status, you can accrue, is my understanding of it. So if you bring a guy back and you're under the cap, well, you start accruing at that point.
I was trying to figure out conceptually why it's rigged the way it is. First of all, I want to say this. Like, people might say to us, well, David and Bruce, you guys write about hockey all the time. Like, you should know this stuff. And I thought that for a long time too.
Mhm.
And I'm not, I am letting us off the hook here, because Ira Cooper, who is a lawyer, right?
Lawyer.
A contract lawyer,
Yeah.
like a corporate contract lawyer. I believe that's what Ira does for a living. Yeah. And he's been through it. And he says he has a hard time sometimes figuring out exactly what's going on, because it's a dense, complicated document. So when I hear from a lawyer who's a very sharp guy that this is the case, I just think, okay, this may be something of a confusopoly where, like, it's either on purpose it's vague, or not on purpose it's vague, but it's vague. And even lawyers have a hard time with this. So, but conceptually, what I'm thinking is the reason they have the LTIR rule the way it is they don't want players on LTIR to have value in trade necessarily. So if you were able to accrue, for instance, cap space with a player on LTIR, that player then wouldn't have value for another team to trade for him, so they could. Right. So I think that's why the rules but the reason you can bring up other players from your organization and fill in for that guy is because if you got injured players, you need to have a full team. So that's why you're able to get around it. But yeah, it is a little hard on teams with guys who are out, like Clefbaum was for year after year after year.
Apparently there's a guy somewhere in NHL head office who's sort of an arbitrator on, disputes over Elter, because it's just not clear enough that there are situations where the team goes, well, we think this, and it can be interpreted more than one way. And so
is it the same guy, Bruce, who awarded the Calgary Flames a third-round draft pick for the Milan Lucic?
Yeah. They apply the latitude rule. The more northerly the team, the more they get jacked. That's my working theory.
Okay, so we've dealt with that. It's confusing with Kane. The only thing that isn't confusing to me, I think, is there's conflict. There's
between the player and
the team. That's what I think. They're not on the same page. Yeah. But I did really like and appreciate what Bowman said. I think Bowman got it absolutely right in his comment. And it should be between the player and his doctor, first of all. Agreed. And, we saw with Connor McDavid, like some teams might have pushed him, especially in the past. And maybe the Oilers would have too if it wasn't Connor McDavid. But he didn't want surgery. He wanted to go a different route and see if he could heal on his own. And that worked. And I think a lot of players probably paid attention to that, being the top most prominent player in hockey, him going that route. There might be some skepticism, just generally speaking, about surgery from some players, more so than in the past, about that being the thing you go to right away. We also had the Jack Eichel situation.
Jack Eichel, I was just going to say.
Another absolutely top player who decided not to go to the route of, I think it was a spinal fusion, and he wanted to get a replacement disc put in. And he just wasn't comfortable with what the team was doing. And I think that I side with the players on situations like this. So I side with Evander Kane on this. Like, if there is, he should absolutely, and Bowman got this right. So there might not be two sides in this, in a way. Like, if Stan Bowman is, what he says is the truth, that was exactly right, Stan Bowman. And he's expecting to go into the season with Kane maybe on the roster. Maybe that's what works for them in terms of LTIR. I'm not exactly sure, because I don't completely understand all the rules around it. But he was on the right track, and I thought it was a very strong and clarifying statement from Woodman on this issue. Bruce,
no argument with Bowman's take on that. And the Eichel one, he wanted a revolutionary type of surgery that Buffalo wasn't happy with, and they were at such loggerheads that they basically agreed to part ways. And Buffalo traded him to Vegas, where they put him on Elter and gave him permission to get the kind of surgery he wanted, and obviously it was successful for him and for them. They won the cup with Jack Eichel.
Yeah, and you can see why there's controversy. There's
Yeah.
different ways you can proceed with
Yep.
injury, right? Like, and there's like percentage chances in each direction, which is going to turn out and which won't turn out, and there's timing issues, and you have the one's going to take longer than the other, and so these are complicated things. But this is Evander Kane's body, which he has for the rest of his life,
Yep.
and the Oilers need one thing from Evander Kane, for him to be healthy in the playoffs next year. And I think if both sides fundamentally keep their eyes on that prize, and that's got to be the goal for both sides, and let the other chips fall where they may.
Well, at least now they can afford the contract and within the cap.
That's why they traded Ceci,
with
right?
a little bit left over, which is why they traded Ceci and didn't match on the two kids.
Yeah.
It's a heavy price to pay, but at least now they do have that leeway that they're not beholden to, being forced to do something partway through the season. It's already done. What needed to be done is done.
All right, Bruce. Another issue that's is the Edmonton Oilers prospect pool. So I've just written a recent post on this, and the latest draft Insider Out with his view on the Oilers prospect pool is Corey Pronman of The Athletic. And he ranks the Oilers 30th out of 32 teams in the NHL in terms of their prospect pool, the value of the Oilers prospect pool. And he says the following: the Edmonton Oilers looked penciled into the 32nd spot on this ranking, but then they went out and made aggressive moves to trade up for Sam O'Reilly and deal for Matt Savoy. Their system is still quite light, but at least has some substance and players I could see helping Edmonton one day. Although he didn't exactly bump them up a mile with the acquisition of Savoy and Sam Riley, just 2 spots. In late July, Stephen Ellis of the Daily Faceoff said, quote, "I'm not going to sugarcoat it. The Edmonton Oilers have one of the worst prospect pools in the league. And it's not a surprise to anyone who follows this organization closely. They're built to win now, and they're willing to move on from the future to make it work." So those are the two views from guys who dig deeply into prospects, Bruce, that have come after the Savoy and O'Reilly moves. What do you think of, is it O'Reilly or Riley?
O'Reilly.
O'Reilly. Those are the two. What do you think of their assessments? What would you say about what they're saying?
Well, the prospect pool is pretty light. I do agree with Pronman's assessment that the Oilers, beefed theirs up a little bit when they traded an actual NHL player and successful prospect of the past who's graduated in Ryan McLeod to get a promising young player in Matt Savoy. Clearly, that pumped up the system, and Savoy is going to rank pretty high on our own summer rankings when time comes. So too is O'Reilly, that they didn't even have a draft pick until, they had no first rounder going into the draft, and they traded next year's first rounder to get an actual prospect. Well, that guy gets weighted in this system, whereas next year's first rounder they wouldn't have considered. So it's a little bit beefed up. Robbie Urventi came in, but Xavier Bourgault went out. There was, I thought, an omission in Pronman's list that he didn't even mention Max Wanner, who's a 7th round pick, but a guy that's outkicked his coverage since basically right away after he got picked. He's outperformed, and he, to me, projects as a potential NHLer, but maybe not a huge difference maker, but maybe a third pairing guy. But he certainly warrants a mention, which he didn't get in that particular post. But I'm not sure that would do a whole lot to move, wouldn't move him from 30th to 10th or anything. It would just be, here's one more guy to consider. But they're light. They traded away so many picks, and we're now at a place where Ken Holland was GM for 5 years, and the Oilers have nobody that's currently on the roster that was drafted during the Holland era, and they have all of the first rounders from that time are gone. They either were traded away, as in the case of Reed Schaefer, traded away as a pick, as in the case of the pick that went with Reed Schaefer to get Ekholm. I mean, they got value, obviously, in that deal. They got traded away in Xavier Bourgault, or they got signed as free agents, as was the case with both Broberg and Holloway. All of them are gone. There's not one first rounder from the 5 years that Ken Holland was at the helm there. So,
in assessing Holland's draft record, some people have said that and kind of left it at that. But it should be noted that Broberg and Holloway are both, players taken
NHL
in that
players.
range. Yeah, players taken in that range have, like Broberg's range, have about a 50-50 chance of become real good NHLers, like top 4 D-men or top 6 wingers. Same with Holloway's range, a little bit less, maybe down to 40%. So for both of those players, I mean, Holloway was on a Stanley Cup final team. He was in the top 6, and Broberg was in the top 4 in defense. So in assessing Holland's record drafting, that's an important factor. These two players, and especially if they turn out, I mean, you can easily strike out at that range in the draft. For instance, in Evan Bouchard's year, when he was taken 10th overall, Bruce, he had a 50-50 chance of turning out. And he's obviously turned out in spades, but players drafted ahead of him include Adam Boqvist, Barrett Hayton, Phillips Zadina, and Vitaly Kravtsov, and Jesper Kotkaniemi, who's, I'd say the jury is still out on whether Kotkaniemi will be like a really good player, like a second line center in the NHL. That's probably the ceiling for him. I don't think he's achieved that yet. So five of the players taken ahead of Bouchard are either not turning out or are iffy at this point. And so it's just, even drafting where Broberg and Holloway were taken, they weren't sure things. So it's a feather in Holland's cap in terms of drafting that both of those guys are trending in the right direction, at least right now. We'll see. There's still a chance that neither Broberg nor Holloway will become really good NHL players, as I've just defined them.
Yeah, well, and the other issue is that the Oilers are such a deep team with pros, Ken Holland's pros, that it was hard for these guys to break through and make the kind of impact that would raise them. And I mean, the Athletics rankings, I think, were 22 and under, whether they were in the NHL or not.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been, it's tough slogging to break in. We'll talk, I think, a little bit later on, a little bit more about Broberg. So I'll save my.
Well, let's segue into that, because what the issue of Kurt Levens just wrote about it again yesterday, the issue of who's to blame for what happened with Broberg and Holloway. And so what you're getting at is, this Oilers championship window has meant Holland's traded away numerous draft picks. Sometimes it's worked out, as in the Matthias Ekholm trade, and sometimes it hasn't, as in the Andreas Athianasso trade. 2 second-round picks for a player who was marginal for the Oilers in the end and didn't even stay here. So they've traded away numerous draft picks. That's affected the prospect pool. And in terms of Broberg and Holloway, they were blocked. Broberg was blocked the second they brought in Brett Kulak, and Holloway's been blocked by any number of forwards coming in repeatedly. So both of those, that's part of the reason. They needed to win now. They needed to solve problems now. The penalty kill needed to be solved. So that means Vinny DeHarnay, who isn't as good an even strength player as Philip Broberg, he's in the lineup because he can kill penalties better right now than Philip Broberg can, even though Philip Broberg in the long run might be better at that as well than DeHarnay. But DeHarnay moves ahead of him. And that's a significant moment in what goes wrong with Broberg stay in Edmonton. Bruce, what we're going to do is give percentage apportioning blame. We'll each come up with a percentage, and we won't proportion blame for Holloway and Broberg themselves. Because you could say they're completely to blame. They decided to leave. They signed offer sheets elsewhere. They didn't do enough with the team. So we'll just leave them out of the apportioning of blame, if that's okay. And we'll just look at from the Oilers side of it, if there were mistakes, what is the percentage of blame? And I'll let you go first, Bruce. What are your percentages? What would you say?
Yeah, well, I'm largely with Kurt on Ken Holland. I know folks who were happy to pile on Ken Holland during his time here will now say, typical media piling on a guy after he leaves. Uh, uh, well, 1 year ago, in August of 23, I wrote a post that was titled, "Is there such a thing as too much depth? Ask young Oilers D-man Philip Broberg." And I talked about how Holland made him sort of his prize draft pick when he first arrived, 8th overall, and there was whispers of Broberg right away, even before the draft, and they came true when there were other good players on the board. And the idea was, well, we're going to, slow play Broberg in the minors, and they wound up slow playing him because they built a wall in front of him. I mean, Holland traded for left defensemen throughout the time Broberg was in the organization. Dmitry Kulikov, Duncan Keith, Brett Kulak, and then Matthias Ekholm. And of course, the last two remain relevant. Kulak, because they signed him to a 4-year extension after the successful trade deadline pickup. He was a good ad. Don't get me wrong. 4 years is a long time, especially when you have a lefty bubbling under. And then when they added Ekholm, and he had a same expiry date as 2026 as Kulak. And I never mentioned the name Darnell Nurse, who was signed to an 8-year extension. And lefty is chock-a-block. I think I might have mentioned last podcast, I know I have to my wife more than once, that the wall was 3 NHL defensemen wide, $18 million in cap hit high, and 4 years deep. Remains 2 years deep. And Broberg, there was the only place to play him was on his weak side because the left side was completely locked down. Now, I forgot to mention, but somebody reminded me last week, Ryan Murray was signed to a PTO and made the team and knocked Broberg down to the minors in October. Let's give the guy some games.
That was 2022-23, wasn't it?
Yeah. That was the year that the job was Broberg's to lose, and then they brought in Ryan Murray, and he took the job. So there was issues. So to me, I'm going to say Ken Holland.
What percent?
With I'll say 60.
Okay.
For blocking the path so completely that it remains blocked for 2 more years, and Broberg sort of went, well, where am I going to go? These guys have, they got seniority, they got NHL experience, they're getting paid, they got term. Where do I fit? And so that's a big part of it. Now, Jeff Jackson gets a chunk of it, and I'm going to say 30%.
Okay.
For when he did all of his largely good work on July 1st, but he backburnered the 2 kids and sort of did the NHL thing. And this is where I give him a little bit of grace, is that teams have been doing this for years. Let's put the kids on the last priority, and especially the ones coming off ELC that don't have ARB rights, and we can just pay them what's left at the end of the summer. And they'll never jump the queue because offer sheets don't happen in this league, right? There's only been 2 this century. Well, guess what? There's now been 4 this century, and half of them were an attack on the Edmonton Oilers in a single day. So that one really hurts. But, signing, for instance, Victor Arvidsson, now you can say he's a fine player and he should help, and you can look and say, well, he's injury prone, it's a bit of a risk. Well, what you can't argue is that 2 years times $4 million probably would have been enough to get both of those younger guys done for 2 years.
Correct. So Jackson
And
the
Bowman
rest.
gets the leftovers because he took over a situation and basically didn't do anything until they were gone. And I don't know what he could have done at that point. So 10% might be high, it might be low, but he's the number 3 culprit in
Okay.
my
So
scheme of things.
60% Holland, 30% Jackson, 10% Bowman, roughly.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to go 40% Ken Holland, 35% for Jeff Jackson, 19% for Jay Woodcroft and Dave Manson.
Okay.
5% for Knobloch and Coffee. And it's a weird 5%. I'm going to get into that. Yeah. And 1% less for Bowman. I'll start with Bowman.
I didn't consider the coaches at all. I was thinking in terms of management, but
yeah.
Sure. Carry on.
Bowman, I can't say he has 0% because I don't know what could have been done, but he comes in here late July. These offer sheets, Brian Lawton said he heard rumor of them. They've been perking along for weeks now. And there's so much history there. What can he do? I guess in the end, he could have moved mountains to keep the players. So that's what he's
traded them and got more than frickin' second and third round pick.
If he was sniffing it out and thinking it was really happening, he could have quickly tried to trade them. But then, so there's, I'm going to say I don't say 0 because there's probably something he could have done, but I don't really blame him for what happened here because this was almost a fait accompli. I'm thinking the offer sheets at that point were a fait accompli. They were going to happen. They were coming. And it was just a matter of maybe convincing Holloway's agent to go along with it at that point. And I'm just guessing here. So Coffey and Knobloch, when they took over the team it was a panic situation in November when they took over the team. Broberg had not done well up to that point. He was playing weak hockey. He had lost his confidence. I don't blame them for going with the Harney at that point. And thinking what this kid needs is ice time and to play, and for him being sent down when he did. I think that was the right call for Broberg. And even if it pushed him at that moment to demand a trade in early December, his situation with the team when Knobloch and Coffey were running the team. But I think the real blame is a weird kind of blame because they believed in the player enough to play him in the playoffs. And if he didn't play in the playoffs, there's no way the offer for Broberg would have been that high. If he didn't excel do as well as he didn't excel in the playoffs, he did well with Nurse where everybody else had failed, not done well. CC and Desharnais, and Kulak apparently didn't want to be there he wasn't.
He didn't want to play the wrong side.
Yeah. So by believing in him and giving him that shot, they put the Oilers in a position where he excelled. He helped the team. He did well, not excelled. He did well. And that opened people's eyes to his play. And so that's part of what happened. So if you're looking for responsibility, well, that's partly responsible for how things played out. And that's just life in the NHL, right? If you have a good player and he shows his stuff, if you give him the coach, if that gives him value. So it's built into it. Because I'm really looking at responsibility, not blame. 19% for Woodcroft and Manson. You brought up a fact that I had overlooked, the whole Ryan Murray thing. What a fiasco that is. To bring in him and play him over Philip Broberg is a
blunder to me.
That is a total
long-term.
Yeah. What are you doing? What are you doing? Seriously, what are you doing at that point? And I don't know if we said that at the time. Maybe we didn't. So maybe this is just in retrospect. And we didn't identify it then.
Can't recall, to be honest, but our job now is to analyze what happened.
Yeah. So maybe we're partly to blame, Bruce, for not calling out these things more strongly as they happened. And other fans as well. So the Desharnais thing, though, I've already talked about that, how it's all about this win now, right? Win now mentality in Kulak. And Woodcroft and Manson are at the heart of that, just like all the coaches are. And they're looking at the moment winning now rather than how far can you take this player? Where's he gonna take this team down the road? Mm-hmm. Maybe they didn't see that enough. didn't push that hard enough in their calculations. So I think that they were deeply involved in those years and those decisions made about the player. And they chose a number of defensemen over him, including last year when they paired him up with Ekholm. And because the whole team stunk, it seemed like suddenly, Broberg's the scapegoat. And Bouchard and Nurse aren't. Here's Darnell Nurse right in the middle of it again. He's not playing well with Bouchard. He got a chance there. And they had Ekholm with Broberg, and they lose big to Vancouver. And they immediately go away from that. And Broberg's out of the lineup soon enough. So he didn't play well, though. Philip Broberg didn't play well at that time. But I just see that those two coaches having a lot of the responsibility. Jackson, everyone applauded him, including me, for being so aggressive. But maybe signing Jeff Skinner for $3 million, or both Skinner and Arvidsson, and then $4 million, and then he signed. Maybe they weren't expecting Henrique to come back, and then suddenly they get him too at $3 million. So suddenly they have all these players and they're over the cap, and they have put them. Jeff Jackson, with all those signings, put his team in a really, really tough position in terms of retaining if there were offer sheets.
Right.
And that's on him. He had to make that calculation. Okay, I'm going to take, like, he's also factoring in, is Kane going to go on LTIR? He doesn't maybe know, the information's incomplete, and he's balancing all of these different ideas. Can I trade CC? Can I open up cap space that way if needs be? But that was his job, his responsibility to figure that out. And as Brian Lawton, former NHL GM, has said, it's up to the GM to look for danger behind every tree. And let's say Jackson did that, but clearly if he did it, he miscalculated. They knew of St. Louis's interest in Broberg and Holloway through trade talk.
Yep.
So he's to wash your hands of his culpability. And he was also head of hockey operations for the full year, working with Ken Holland when when they could have signed, I think, from January 1st on, if not before then, Broberg and Holloway to new contracts. He is ultimately responsible for the organization's hockey operations. He's the top guy. So he's in an oversight capacity of Holland initially, and then he is the guy in July when he makes all these signings. So 35%, and that might be light. He might actually be the most responsible person because of his work at that time. So he's at 35%, and Holland's at 40%. He's overseeing Jay Woodcroft and Madsen's handling of the team. He's overseeing the development of Broberg. It's his job to think of the future of the team as well as the past. He could have, there's an opportunity perhaps to either trade Broberg last winter when he demands a trade, just move on at that time, or to work through it and try to work through it. And maybe working through it, though, would have been signing him to a new contract and signing Holloway to deals before the playoffs were over. There was a small window there where he's still in charge. So I'd say Holland is about 40%. And again, I might actually have both Jackson and Holland at about the same, which would be about 37.5% for both of those guys. And the rest of the blame apportioned, as I've already stated.
Yeah, well, it didn't end well, and you can find various places around the magazine where, steps were taken that didn't work out, at least from the perspective of this player. And I mean, the nail in the coffin, you could say, was the Ekholm trade, and you can't really criticize that as being a bad trade. And it would have been less impactful had not Kulak already had a 4-year deal in place. And just like that, they went from 4 righties and 3 lefties under the Jay Woodcroft, Dave Manson 7 defenseman plan to 3 righties and 4 lefties. And all of a sudden, the 7th guy went from being Vincent DeHarnay, being the 4th righty, to Philip Broberg being the 4th lefty. And his playing time just petered out after that. And he
had been playing well under Woodcroft
he'd been playing with Bouchard on the 3rd pairing under that 7-man crew with Desharnais, mixing in here and there, but they were a pretty regular pairing and they were crushing it. Now, in retrospect, maybe that was all Bouchard because we're seeing how good he is now. But Bouchard and Broberg were pretty darn successful as a third pairing, and then Bouch moved up to what was then envisioned as the second pairing, quickly the first, and Broberg, went down the escalator as Bouchard went up, and it just changed how things would be. But I think some of the moves involving more veteran defensemen blocking Broberg's path was pretty impactful and probably soured the player, to be honest.
Yeah. According to our own analysis, where we're looking at players' individual contributions to grade A shots, it was very much a partnership with Broberg and Bouchard. They were both doing well.
Mm-hmm.
Both of them were playing solid hockey in a third pairing role at that time. And, when they moved on for Ekholm, they did move out a defenseman in Barry.
Right.
But as you say, it changed, switched the mix. Yeah. The reason, though, it's the reason we're going over this, like people might say, why are you digging into this? Well, for one thing, it keeps popping up. Everyone else is talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And to some extent, big extent, I comment on what other people are saying about the Oilers and discuss it. But it is also like, there hasn't been a moment each day, Bruce, where I haven't for a second thought about what happened there. Like, honestly. So it still is bothering many Oiler fans a lot. I did a poll, and I think I said, let me see if I can find the poll, where I was asking people, what do you think? It's been a week. What do you think of the of this trade now? Was it a like nothing major? Was it a speed bump? Was it not good at all, but not fatal? Or was it a total fiasco? And just getting to the results here. What would you say in terms of your own thought on that?
I'm a moderate, so I'll say the second last one.
Yeah.
Problem, not necessarily fatal. I mean, the Oilers are still Stanley Cup contenders, but they've been weakened.
Yeah, that was the consensus answer, which if my internet was not slow, I would have to you by now. But here we go. I got it now. Looks like it's coming. What's that circle called that keeps going so slow?
The hamster wheel.
The hamster wheel.
It's funny because the hamster's actually going pretty fast when that circle is going like that. But yeah, it's.
You'd have to be one fast hamster on that wheel.
Yeah.
I'm going through all of my various posts, and
we're talking all about Broberg in this last little while. We haven't mentioned, Holloway. Like they lost two guys at once here, 2 first-round draft picks.
So as I say,
lower picks.
So no big deal, Bruce. 6.9%. Speed bump, 20.3%. So about 27% of Oiler fans think this isn't major.
Right.
Not good, but not fatal, 63%. And a major fiasco, 10%. And I think I voted not good, but not fatal. But my second vote would be major fiasco.
Yes, 100%.
This is
much end of the spectrum.
Sure. This is not good, but it isn't fatal to the team. There are ways around it with the way the salary cap is. You can come back from this, but this is not good. Not
good. I mean, it could have been that if they matched the offers, that might have been fatal. But getting themselves in that situation is where it's more the fiasco part, that they were vulnerable and they got taken to the cleaners.
Alrighty.
So, how many votes?
874.
That's a solid.
Smaller poll, but big enough to get a sense. All right, Bruce, let's move on to the next subject. So long, Philip Broberg, and the question is, who's going to be playing with Darnell Nurse? And we've already talked about the Nurse curse, how a number of the players, 3 out of the 4 guys who partnered up with Nurse are now off the team in the playoffs. And Low Tide's written a post, Alan Mitchell's written a post saying for 10 years they've been searching for a partner for Darnell Nurse. And I'll say for like 8.5 of those years, Bruce, I've been solidly, and I know you have, in Nurse's camp as a player, like believing in the player, arguing that he's playing well, seeing that he's playing well. But things have changed in the last year and a half. He struggled in the playoffs the previous year.
2 years in a row.
2 years in a row. And this year, his game collapsed in the second half and in the playoffs. And, for me, the major issue, and I wrote a post, isn't Broberg and Holloway leaving. What is fatal for the Oilers is if Darnell Nurse doesn't play well, if he doesn't get his game together and play like at least the number 3 defenseman in the NHL, like a solid, good number 3 defenseman. If that doesn't happen, Bruce, this team is not winning the Stanley Cup. They are not. That is, I think, fatal to the team. And what do you think of the odds are that he will turn it around? I put them at 70-30 that he will turn it around this coming season. I'm still a believer. And who do you think the Oilers should bring in to pair with Nurse, or is that solution already on the team? I'll give you those two.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it's not going to be the 3 guys he played the most with in the playoffs were Cody Ceci, Vincent DeHarnay, and Philip Broberg. Isn't going to be any one of those guys.
No.
The 4th guy he played a little bit with in the playoffs was Brett Kulak. And Kulak, after a couple games, which they won, reportedly, and of course I wasn't in the room, but reportedly he was saying he preferred playing on his natural side, and that might have been heard as he didn't want to play with Nurse. Who the hell knows? Because asked to switch sides and then playing with a guy who's struggling is that's a pretty tall ask. Although Broberg,
tall ask for him too. Yeah, he was okay.
I mean, his underlying numbers, their underlying numbers as a pair weren't that great, but they were outscoring in goals. They got saves behind him and goals in front of him, and it looked good. Perhaps better than it was. Of the 3 guys that they brought in, Emberson, Stetcher, and Brown, all of them played in the NHL last year. All of them were at most 3rd pairing defenseman based on usage. Emberson the most, 16.5 minutes per game. That's 3rd pairing. Stetcher 15.5. Brown 12.5. And you're looking at pairing any one of those guys with a workhorse like Nurse, who at various times in his career has been pushing 25 minutes, and even pushed down the lineup a bit. He's still over the 20-minute mark. So who you got that's going to play those kind of minutes? Well, Cody Ceci, for all of his apparent warts, was a 20-minute a night player in this league for his whole career. He's averaged over 20 minutes a game. That's almost 800 games. Well, he's gone now as an option, and maybe there's a better fit, but Emberson has got like 30 NHL games under his belt, and Stetcher's been in and out of the lineup in various locations that he's played, and I think the same applies to Brown. I'm not sure any one of those guys is a real natural fit to play, the kind of minutes and competition that you expect from your, top cap hit defenseman in Darnell Nurse, who's, whatever else. He has been a workhorse throughout, and you expect him to get more, heavy minutes. And presumably they're still going to be going with 6 defensemen. It's not like they're going to have 7 and they're going to give them 2 partners in a game. So I'm not sure any of them is exactly the perfect solution. But who the hell is, and how can they get them, and how can they afford them?
Yeah, so there's talk of bringing in, like we've talked about, you can have an endless number of these $1.1 million players, because if they don't work out, veterans, you can just send them to the minors. And this is one of the interesting things. Like, some people seem to be arguing, well, the Oilers got by there's cap space now that they didn't go with Broberg and Holloway, and that's true to some extent. But Broberg and Holloway were also going to be kind of in these $1.1 million players for the Oilers. So it's not like, if things had gone well, they would have signed them for deals around then, and then the cap issue wouldn't have been big with them either. Like, there's not suddenly this abundant cap space with Broberg and Holloway moving on, because they weren't going to take a lot of cap space if everything had gone as planned, but it obviously didn't. Anyway, that's a side issue. Bruce, they're talking about bringing in a number of defensemen. Justin Schultz is on the list. Mentioned Kevin Shattenkirk, someone called Gustav Lindstrom, who I'm not that familiar with, Tyson Barrie, Travis Dermott, and I've mentioned Tony DeAngelo, and I've heard other people mention him as well. Now, Darcy Woodguy-McLeod did a statistical analysis, and I won't get into like his methods or all that he has to say, but none of them, according to Darcy, of those players are great bets to be a second pairing defenseman in the NHL this coming year, he said. And the best bet, I think he was leaning towards Justin Schultz as being marginally a better bet than the other guys. He wasn't that high on Tyson Barrie. I will note that the Tyson Barrie Nurse partnership in Edmonton did really well. And they did okay. They even, like, when they did really well when they were paired up with McDavid. They were 52 goals for and 35 against over the 3 years. When they were 60% goals for percentage when they were with McDavid, but without him, they were 24 goals, 23 against. So they kind of held their own without McDavid as well. And so I wouldn't be surprised for the Oilers to go in Barrie's direction, even though he's 33 now. He had a weak year in Nashville, but listen, they got to get Nurse going. And if he's comfortable with Tyson Barrie, that worked in the past, I can see them thinking, let's try that. Right. He's 30, he's 33, he's not 43. Like, Barrie's old, but he's not a physical defender. And, he's not a great skater, but he's an okay skater, and he can move the puck. He teamed up well with Nurse. You can say the same thing, though, with Justin Schultz, like a very similar player in a lot of ways in terms of attributes to Tyson Barrie. So I could see them easily going with either of those two. I'm curious about DeAngelo, and I know he's got a reputation, Bruce, for being for saying inappropriate things. And I'm not an expert on that whole history, but I do know that since that has come out, he has been in the NHL, and he's had not last year. He had a weak year with Carolina, but in the previous 2 years, he had 51 points in 64 games for Carolina and was plus 30. Then he went to Philadelphia, and he was 42 points in 70 games, but he was minus 27. Last year, he played just 31 regular season games and but he played 9 in the playoffs. So they thought enough of him that they were playing him fairly regularly in the playoffs. He'll be 29 in October, so he's considerably, he's more in the window of being in your prime.
Nurse's age, right?
Yeah, and he and Nurse played together for half a season in Sault Ste. Marie, so they know each other. And you could, if there's any question about where he's going to fit on, if he could fit in on the team, we'll just ask Nurse. So I think he should be considered an option, although he's rumored to maybe be going to the KHL. So we don't know how far along that is, but he's a little younger. He's still in his prime. As compared to Schultz, who's 34, Barrie's 33, Shattenkirk's 35. Dermott seemed like the least capable by far of all of these players. Knobloch also was in the Rangers organization when DeAngelo was there. So he will have, and that's where the problems came up. So he will have an assessment of DeAngelo's as a person and whether he would fit in or not as well. So that's something to consider.
The other guy that's out there on the pile yet that's surprising to me is and a low tide. I mentioned him in his article, which was, by the way, at The Athletic, for those trying to find it. Gustav Lindstrom, 25-year-old Swedish defenseman, who he's 1 year to the day older than Evan Bouchard. and he's a right shot defenseman, 6'2". Played last year with Anaheim Ducks, Montreal, and they traded him to Anaheim. And with Anaheim, he played 32 games, no goals, 6 assists, plus 12 with Anaheim Ducks. So that kind of jumps off the page. And looking at the rest of his stats, it seems like, he was okay, but that plus is a big fluke. Like, he had a huge save percentage. And, when your goalie stops everything, well, you're going to do well. But I mean, maybe the goalie stopped everything because he didn't face so many tough shots. We don't know. But, the rest of his stats suggest that he's, he was part of the group in Anaheim, but didn't stand out the way that plus suggests that he might. 15 minutes a night, so third pairing again. And every one of these guys that we're mentioning are sort of 15-minute a night players. And so there's no sort of natural, obvious fit with Darnell, other than, to me, maybe the fit is Evan Bouchard himself. And mix Nurse in there and let Ekholm, run another pair. Maybe even Ekholm winds up playing the right side, because that's something we haven't seen here. But
he did that regularly in Anaheim, or excuse me, in Nashville. Yeah, so Gustav Lindstrom, second-round pick of the Detroit Red Wings in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
Ken, old Tyler Wright, Ken Holland pick.
Yeah,
and he is not torn up the pea patch.
He's just a guy, right? But he's 25 and he's got close to 200 games of NHL experience and showed some promise last year. And he's never played on a good team. Detroit, and Montreal, Anaheim, and when he was there, none of those teams was really a contender at all. So it's hard to tell whether he was part of the problem or whether it was just, in a no-win situation.
So much of it is Nurse, like if he can crank it up and play well, he could carry maybe Ty Amberson or Gustav Lindstrom until the trade deadline, when maybe then you can get a fill in with a better player. Although you're going to, we saw how small the market was for right shot defensemen at the last trade deadline, when Sean Walker commanded a first round draft pick, and he had been kind of a third, maybe fourth pairing guy sometime for most of his NHL career. So this is a major issue, but in some ways I think the big issue is, again, Nurse and not who's going to fill in beside them, although they're both need to be addressed. Ekholm and Nurse might work. Bouchard and Nurse might be worth another try. It's hard to break up Ekholm and Bouchard, though, because if you have those two guys together, you can play them 25 minutes a game, Bruce. You could give them heavy minutes. They control the puck together so well. It's often in the other team's end, so it's not as heavy. The minutes aren't as heavy as they otherwise might be if you're in your own end all the time. So I don't see them breaking up that partnership, and I don't think it probably isn't wise to. And Nurse is just going to have to get it together, play better hockey.
Yeah.
Alrighty, what else is on?
I'm not sure Darnell's ever been quite the same since he played through the playoffs with that torn hip flexor in 22. Yeah.
Was that in 22? That was the previous.
Yeah, when they got swept by Colorado in the conference final. And he got hurt late in the season, and he was doubtful starter for the playoffs, and he played every game. Or maybe he got suspended for a game again.
Well, yeah, maybe it's taken out.
He toughed it out, to his credit, but you wonder, sometimes those things take a toll
on his physical play. Like, he hasn't been the physical player he used to be, and maybe that's why he just doesn't want to get hurt again. Like, who does? And if you've had, physical contact invites injury, and maybe he doesn't want to play that game. Well, he's going to have to figure it out then, and not be so, let's be honest, mistake prone on defense, causing grade A shots and goals against. That's the issue. and it's a big issue in the playoffs. He was by far the Oilers' weakest defenseman, and you can't have that for a player of his stature on the team. Forget his salary, but just what they need from him to win. He's got to come through. Bruce, let's talk a little bit about some prospects. You looked a little bit at the 15th ranked Nikita Yasayev. What are you thinking about him?
It's a pretty odd sequence of events that he had. I mean, the Oilers drafted him in the 6th round, and out of the Russian junior ranks, and 2 years ago, and then as an 18-year-old, he made the jump straight to the KHL, and he played, I think, 11 minutes a game. Not a huge, doesn't sound like huge minutes, but most 18 or even 19-year-olds who play in the KHL are actually extra players on the roster. They got this weird rule that you can add a 19 and an 18-year-old as a 21st and 22nd player on the roster. Well, guess what? They usually wind up being the 13th or 14th forward or the 8th defenseman, and they sit on the bench and they get 2 or 3 shifts, and maybe in a blowout they'll get a few minutes. And so of a very small group of 18 and even 17-year-old defensemen in the KHL that year, he had the most minutes. He had the most games played, and he had more goals and points than all the other, I think there was 5 other guys combined. And it seemed like he made a huge step forward. And on our rankings, we jumped him, I think, from 26 to 10 last year. And then in his second year, he started the year in the KHL under his famously named coach, Zinatula Bilyaletdinov, who apparently was not keen on young players, and he rooted out most of them before they played 20 games. And sure enough, Yevseyev played 19 games. He spent the 20th game sitting on the end of the bench, never got on the ice, and then he was gone from the KHL. And down he went to the VHL, which is the high minors in Russia, the second tier league. And there he split his time between 2 teams, and then played 21 games in the playoffs, and this team won the championship. So there was kind of a happy ending. But it's a weird situation that if he'd have done those seasons in the reverse order, sort of broke his way in at 18 and then made the sort of full-time-ish in the KHL at 19, you think this is excellent progress. But he actually made a huge jump and then a little drop back. He may have been better served to be in the VHL. At least he was getting 17 minutes a game there, and playing a regular role on an 8-man defense unit, I might add, where 17 minutes is a lot more than it sounds like. Like he was second on his team in average ice time, so essentially top pairing. So by no means give up on the guy, but he did take a measurable step backwards in terms of he wound up a league lower than he did as a younger man. And so we dropped him from 10 to 15 with our, average rankings of our 5 panelists. And he remains a player of interest, but he also remains a Russian, which has been a real problem for the Oilers over the years. I'm going to write a little bit more on this with a prospect that we'll be featuring next about the Oilers' very spotty history, selecting, drafting specifically. They've had some very good Russians that played for the team that they got as pros. But in terms of drafting themselves, their record's not been great.
The prospect I wrote about, number 14 on our list, is a Finnish goalie, Emil Vini, and I don't know the pronunciation of his name necessarily. So he was drafted 64th overall. And so I looked at just the history of the Oilers in terms of drafting goalies in that range. So like between about 30th to 85th, like it's a fairly big range that I looked at. Mm-hmm. And a whole lot of them haven't turned out, although some of them turned out quite spectacularly in life, I have to say. So there's the ones who were drafted in that range and didn't turn out: Jeff Durant Delorier, Andrew Werner, Patrick Dovigi, who is, I think, an incredibly successful businessman right now, like a billionaire.
All of this.
Daryl Ray, an
Billionaire.
extremely successful broadcaster, but
Right.
not a great
Absolutely.
NHLer. Samu Perhonen, Adam Hauser, and Ilya Konovalov. And there's two that were taken
and
there.
a Russian. No chance.
Olivier Rodriguez, the jury's still out. We'll know more.
Right.
And Stuart Skinner, who's panned out. So all those picks, only one of them, Stuart Skinner, is really panned out. So now we have, so it's a tough spot to make it from. Vinny as a goaltender, it strikes me as, I called him Mr. Excitement, because he sounds like kind of a young Finnish version of Mike Smith. He's a big goalie, 6'2", 6'3". Everyone talks about being a big goalie. So, who charges out to stop shooters, loves to play the puck, it makes some spectacular side-to-side saves, but also lets in iffy goals and bobbles the puck and causes goals against. It sounds like
now. Mike Smith ever do any of those things?
So I can't recall exactly. Mike Smith was he's also been in a goalie fight, Bruce, as you pointed out.
There you go.
On Vinny, when he was drafted, and so Mike Smith is famous for that. It might be his most famous moment as an Edmonton Oiler. When he fought, who did he fight? Talbot?
Cam Talbot.
Yeah, of the Calgary.
Former Flame against former Oiler. Right at center ice in the Saddle Dome.
Spectacular. Here's what Rick Precy, Edmonton's head of amateur scouting, said about Vinny on Oilers Now. Quote, "The things that we liked about Vinny are his athleticism. He's a quick twitch type. He's aggressive. He's got a big personality. He likes to play pucks. Sometimes we have to watch a little bit of over movement in terms of development, holding the play within his posts. But he's big, he's athletic, he's quick, he reads the play really well. He's got big compete. I just think he's got some fire in him." And that description just made me think of Mike Smith all over. So
I'm getting a little bit of a Marc-Andre Fleury vibe from these descriptions as well.
Yeah. Cool.
I have heard counter opinions on Vinny's ability to read the play, and that sometimes is a failing of his. Like, he's good at it until he isn't, And in this case, they have a tap in at the other side of the net kind of thing. But I have not got any observing experience whatsoever on this player.
So tonight you're writing about Matt V. Petrov. What is your take on him, Bruce? Have you done the research yet, or still?
Yeah, I'm working on it. And he's another Russian draft pick that they actually drafted out of Russia, even though he was at the time coming over to play in North Bay as the top pick in the CHL import draft. Who spent extra year back in Russia because of the COVID situation, and so he came a year later. So he played 2 years in North Bay after the Oilers drafted him, and now 1 year in Bakersfield. And last year, it seemed like he got caught up in the mix down there significantly and wound up way down the lineup. So his stats, which in his last year in North Bay, 27 goals, 66 assists, 93 points. And then his first year in Bakersfield, which I think it was 53 games, so it was a pretty decent, most of a season sample, 9 goals, 5 assists, 14 points. And I'm trying to remember the last time I saw a guy go from 66 assists to 5, with a single year. I mean, obviously he went up a level, and lessons were learned. And there's some sort of positive commentary about the guy, but most of it was that, he was just sort of a guy on the team. And as is the case in Bakersfield and a lot of minor league teams, there's a pecking order, and the tweeners and the older veterans, the 5/6 veterans that play in each game generally tend to take on an oversized role with teams. And when you got a Seth Griffith on your team, well, guess what? Matvei Petrov isn't going to be on your power play. And so he's got that year under his belt. Now the question is, can he use that as a stepping stone, or has he just established that this is he is a 6th round draft pick? It's not like he was a It's not like he was Xavier Bourgault, expected to progress and fell back. This is just a guy that's in his first year at the new level had his struggles.
So at this time last year, Bruce, we were all excited about this group of young forwards
Yep.
um, at Bakersfield, and so that would include Matvey Petrov, who was 20, heading
Right.
into his first year. Xavier Bourgault, who was 20, heading into his second year after an okay first year. Tyler Tullio, who was 21 and looked like he was coming on as kind of a feisty forward, and Carter Savoy, 21, coming out of college hockey with, really excelling in college hockey. And Raphael Lavoie, 22, who seemed to be developing somewhat as a power forward down there. And every single one of them, Bruce, took a step back.
Yep.
If like either a small one or an absolutely massive one. And that failure in development is worth thinking about.
Yeah.
What the heck happened with all of those forwards? Were they all overrated by us and others? Not as good as we had hoped? Or is there some kind of issue in team building, putting veterans ahead of them, ice time? What's going on? What happened with all of those wingers, man? Like, that's not good.
Yeah, well, the leading scorers last year in Bakersfield were Seth Griffith, Lane Peterson, Raphael Lavoie, Philip Broberg, Drake Kajula, Greg McKegg. Like, those are your leading scorers among forwards. And then you get down into Carter Savoy, Cameron Wright, Tyler Tullio, Xavier Bourgault. Like the older guys all got a bigger look, it seems like, and probably more power play time, which would be a chunk of the scoring difference. But were the older guys that good, or was winning that important, or were just the young guys just collectively not very good?
And I can't answer that. Like,
Oh,
maybe these young guys just didn't earn
Corey
it, weren't
Pronman did.
close. Did he? What did he say?
30th best prospect pool.
Oh, well, yeah. Yeah.
So anyway,
Jake, yeah, not good, Bruce. And then we're not. Jake Chason was also on that list. He wasn't as highly regarded as the others, but he's no longer. He's out.
So are
So
Tullio,
very
so are Carter Savoy.
frustrated. Very frustrating, Bruce. Like, what happened there, and yeah, it makes me wonder. But I don't even want to guess, because I can't. I didn't see I didn't watch the team in AHL last year at all. I didn't watch AHL hockey, so I can't say. And I know some people who did think it's on the players, and then other people who did think it's on the coaches. So there's a mixed. I know there's a mixed bag of feelings about what happened down there last year. But what we can say was it was a major fail, I think, between the players and the coaches, and altogether, however you want to slice it, didn't work out. Not for one of them, and that's not good for the organization.
Yeah, I mean, Ralph Lavoie, I mean, he got 20, he went from 25 to 28 goals, so marginally a step up, but
He's
is he any
becoming
closer to
older.
being in the NHL?
He got waived, and no NHL team took him. Big wake up call for him, I think, as a player. And for Oiler fans who really valued Lavoie highly, well, there was his value for you, not an NHLer, according to 31 second opinions from other NHL teams, which is a lot. All right, Bruce, did we miss anything else on our list?
I think that's got to be pretty much covering the waterfront. We've been talking for a while, so
we have been. All right.
Probably setting up for one day, I'm guessing.
Yeah, we've met our quota for words. All right, Bruce, thanks for talking today.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone.
And in the meantime, and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.